Enigma depravatio est. Enigma crudelitas est.
Welcome back, my fellow seekers. Today I simply want to present to you an interview by a very credible eyewitness who's not necessarily religious, but he's open to what Catholics and Muslims alike have been teaching for over a millennium. So I think it's important that we look at the video evidence closely and hear what he has to say, since he is an eyewitness and has connections with those in the intelligence agencies, which probably do have more evidence, video evidence, and potential material evidence, but not necessarily technology. I'll leave a link down below to the original report. So I think for those on the UFO Twitter spaces, which I have been a part of recently, I think you need to heed his warning that we may not be dealing with intrinsically biological aliens, but the disclosure of the gods. Without further ado, here is that interview, and keep seeking those enigmas.
Professor Garry Nolan is one of those precocious minds that when you meet them, you know you're in the presence of awesome, incredible intelligence. He's a Stanford University-based professor of immunology. At the moment, he's a nominee for the Nobel Prize. He's one of the most reputable immunologists on the planet, extremely well regarded. He's got multiple patents, huge numbers of papers that have been published in his name. He's got 2 companies listed on the NASDAQ because of successful inventions that he's made. He's just all round a complete total overachiever. And one of the things that I loved in meeting him was his candor. The fact that he was so prepared. He's very fast becoming one of the public faces of UFO, UAP commentary. He's decided to take a very public profile because he's actually an experiencer himself. So when I asked him about the significance of the US government's admissions that have been made about UAPs in the last 12 months, I was quite shocked and surprised at what he told me. Professor, how significant is it that the United States government came out a year ago and admitted that unidentified aerial phenomena are real? Whatever they are, they're a real mystery.
I think it tells us that, first of all, the government has been lying to us for the last 60 or 70 years. I think it gives solace to people who have been told that they were crazy to have been believing or seeing this. So that, to me at least, from the personal point of view, from the human point of view, that's one of the most important things.
I know this is speculative, but why do you think the US government's lied?
I think it's because, frankly, they didn't understand what it was, and nobody wanted to admit that, first of all. But second, they didn't want to admit that they didn't have control over our airspace. We didn't have control over our own airspace.
So the government's been lying, but do you think there's been a cover-up?
Absolutely. I mean, there has been both a cover-up as well as a disinformation campaign to make people look like they were crazy.
See, this is amazing to me, to hear a scientist of your reputation saying this. I mean, you're one of the most eminent immunologists on the planet. You're a Nobel Prize nominee. You're somebody highly respected in your area of medicine. Is it a dangerous thing for you to admit that you think these things about the phenomenon?
I think it's dangerously necessary. I think that this is the kind of thing that if we continue to ignore it, if we continue to ignore the potential danger of what it might represent, we are putting ourselves at risk, both to what it might do to us in sometime in the future, but then ignoring the physics of what these things are capable of doing.
Let's talk about it. What is it?
You know, I wish I knew, and of all the people that I've spoken with on the inside, there's really very little unanimity about what it is, except for that whatever it is appears to be so far advanced from us that it beggars understanding.
So you don't think it's human?
Oh, I'm sure it's not human.
Is it intelligent?
Yes. It certainly acts it, and in some cases it seems to have a sense of humor.
So Garry, the implications of what you're saying there are enormous, aren't they? You're suggesting that there is a highly advanced civilization that is intelligent, it's not human, and it's real.
Yeah, I almost hesitate even to call it a civilization. A civilization implies a lot of interacting parts that are moving towards some sort of goal. I couldn't even say whether or not what it is that is being observed is something like that.
Wow. I mean, I have listened to so many people talk about this topic over the years, and I actually get a little excited when I see Garry Nolan talking about it, because he's the perfect kind of witness. He's credible to the nth degree. Nobody doubts he is who he is. Nobody doubts that he's important, and nobody doubts that he's thought so much about this entire issue that confronts us. So when he voices his opinions like that, Ross, I mean, I get goosebumps. And the thing is, he's just the first of many. If we were to spend the entire time just talking about all the different people who are starting to step forward now and tell their stories, whether they are, some might be experiencers, but others are pilots like Ryan Graves. And then you've got Lou Elizondo, who has become sort of the face of the UAP thing over the years, and he has been talking since 2017 about this. And now I almost thought Lou Elizondo was getting overexposed, and I wondered, is Garry Nolan the new Lou Elizondo? I think he might be, because he is a profoundly interesting person to hear talk about it. Now, having said that, and talked about how incredibly potent he is as a communicator on this issue, I have to say, we need to bring up the whole concept of the Wilson-Davis memo. Now, I know there are people listening and watching who go, I don't know what that is. A lot of people do. But for the people who don't know what it is, I'm going to let you set that one up.
So the important thing to understand about the Wilson-Davis memo is that it's a document allegedly written by a guy called Dr. Eric Davis, who's an astrophysicist of great renown, now working for a government corporation called the Aerospace Corporation. And it wasn't meant to become public. It's a document that purportedly records Eric Davis's conversation with Admiral Tom Wilson, who at the time was the immediate past director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the, if you like, top spy agency for the Defense Department of the United States. And in that conversation, if it is a true record of what actually happened to Tom Wilson allegedly described a UFO crash retrieval program being concealed inside US government and private corporate aerospace. It's an incredible conspiracy, but the amazing thing is, in my interview with Professor Garry Nolan confirmed he believes that the memo is authentic and that it records real events. Have a listen to what Garry told me. Are you aware of a document called the Admiral Wilson document?
Yes.
Do you think it's genuine?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, I know Eric Davis, and Eric is of a kind of character that it's just impossible for him to lie.
The significance of that document is that the former immediate director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Admiral Thomas Wilson, allegedly had a conversation with Dr. Eric Davis, a renowned physicist, where he imparted his discovery that there was a secret UFO reverse engineering program going on inside the US government, where they were hiding recovered spacecraft. And it was being hidden in private aerospace, in a private aerospace corporation. Now, the journalist in me, Garry, thinks Americans can't keep secrets. I mean, everything leaks in this country.
And this is an example of it.
Okay, so you take that point.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it did leak.
Ultimately, it leaked. But what was interesting was that how it was found. It was found in Edgar Mitchell's effects after he died. So it wasn't like anybody went out of their way to put it out there. And it had been
Apollo 14 astronaut, Edgar
right.
Mitchell. Yeah.
And Eric Davis had written it, and I don't know what the story was as to how Dr. Mitchell got a hold of it, but nobody was looking to actively reveal this. It was the work of journalists who finally got a hold of Edgar's materials, who decided to release it. So why would Eric Davis lie about writing something that he never intended to go public in the first place? He was just doing what an intelligence agent does on a regular basis, which is write reports of what it is that they've been doing.
And Eric, quite conspicuously, has never made any comment one way or the other about the veracity of the document.
Right. Well,
he can't, can he?
He can't, but well before this came to light, I already knew of the document. So, because, you know, Eric was part of a group that I was associated with around this.
The implications of that are mind-blowing, Gary.
Yeah.
I mean, this conversation, you've told me that you believe on evidence that there is a non-human intelligence of advanced technology on this planet.
Right, advanced capabilities. Now, I don't know whether it's a technology per se, because I'm leaving open the idea that it's some form of consciousness that is non-material. And I say to my colleagues out there, I know this all sounds absolutely crazy, but if you've seen the things that I've seen, you would only be able to come to a similar conclusion. You know, I know, again, my reputation takes a hit. I'm sure that there are, you know, prizes and other things that I am never going to get because I'm talking about this. That's nowhere near as important as this subject matter to me.
The best science, isn't it, is when you go against the grain.
Yeah. Well, that's Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Eventually, the anomalies and the things that don't fit the picture add up to the point where you can't ignore it anymore. And so that's what has just recently happened. We're watching a Kuhnian moment.
So we like to talk about provenance in the UFO business. Where did documents come from? How was a photo taken? Who handled it? Who didn't handle it? So what I find so interesting about the Wilson Davis memo is how it came to us. There was an astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, from Apollo 14. I think he was the pilot for Apollo 14. And he was very active in the UAP movement. He passed away a few years ago. And when they were going through his things, they found this memo in it. So it isn't like somebody just leaked it. It was like something that Edgar Mitchell had been holding privately, and then it got out. So I think the provenance is interesting on it. But when Garry Nolan says, oh yeah, that's the real thing, I get shivers on that one too because of what it says. And as you said, Ross, it wants to say that there is a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program not being done right now by the US government, but being done by private enterprise. Now, why would that happen? It would happen because the Department of Defense and the government knows that these FOIA, Freedom of Information requests, can pull documents out of the US government, but there's no way to pull a document out of a private enterprise. So that may explain a lot of things.
Yeah, I don't think we can overestimate the significance of somebody like Professor Garry Nolan, who's a close personal friend of Eric Davis and very much an insider. The thing about Garry is he's plugged into the intelligence community. He's been working with the CIA, doing secret investigations for the CIA into military and intelligence personnel, including pilots, who've been exposed to UAPs. He's very highly valued and very well regarded inside the US intelligence and defense community. So to have somebody of his reputation saying what he says is quite awe-inspiring. The other thing, Bryce, that he astonished me with was his candor about his own personal reasons for why he takes the UAP issue seriously. Because Professor Garry Nolan is an experiencer. Ever since he was a child, he's had weird encounters, experiences that he can't explain. Have a listen to what he told me.
So I was a paper boy. This was in Connecticut, Windsor, Connecticut. And there was a man at the end of one of the streets who needed his paper by 5:30 in the morning. And so I would always be there, so I knew about the time. It was dark, it was March or so. And I delivered his paper. And then there was basically a copse of woods through which I had to walk to get to the next street to walk the other way and deliver the papers there. And because it was March, there were no leaves on the trees, and as I was walking through the woods, I could see my shadow in front of me and the shadows of the branches around me, which first kind of caught me off guard because I didn't remember the moon being out. But what was more, I guess, dramatic was that the shadows began to move as I was walking, and they were moving as if there was a light behind me that was moving, which caused me to look up and see an object right at the top of the trees go right over my head, silently. Now,
what sort of object?
It just was a kind of roundish object with, I remember, kind of like 4 or 5 whitish lights pointing down. But you know, I can't even remember how old I was, 10 or 12, whatever.
Were you scared?
Whatever it was. No, I wasn't scared because I didn't know what it was, and I didn't immediately say to myself, I mean, this would have been 1972, 73, and I didn't say, oh, there was a UFO, because I didn't even know what a UFO was. And it really wasn't until about 20 years or so later that, as I paid attention as anybody does to movies and things and UFOs, and it kind of clicked in my head. I said, wait, was that what I saw? And so, you know, that story is like the story of many people. And so I now look at that as, I would call it again, preliminary evidence, preliminary data. I said, okay, well, that's worth understanding. And if other people are seeing the same thing, that's a kind of confirmation. So why are people, as I've told you in prior conversations, why are these people being derided for just reporting what they've seen? Because if it is something else like that, it should interest any scientist, in my mind.
You have had other experiences too, haven't you?
Yeah.
Can you talk about those?
You know, this is probably the more unusual one, and again, I'm hardly the only individual to have had this. Is you wake up as a young boy, I would have been probably 6 or 7 because it was in our first house that my parents had bought in Windsor, of little men in the bedroom. You know, I mean, I was awake. I knew they were there. I could see them.
Scared?
I can't remember being scared, but I remember telling my parents the next day about it.
Could it have been a dream?
It could have been a dream. But so here's the interesting thing. So these little men in the bedroom, and it went on for, I guess, a few weeks, and then it just stopped. So I promptly forgot about it. What was critical was about 20 years again later, actually here in Palo Alto, I was at a used bookstore, and I pulled out a book, and I'm pretty sure it was either John Mack's or Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. And there on the front cover was, and I can feel the hair on my arms going up, was what I saw.
That's the classic grey alien
and
face.
I remember I dropped the book because it was like, whoa. And it was a revelation, I guess.
You had another experience in London that I thought was quite important.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting one because, you know, for no good reason, lying there in the bed in the hotel, I woke up with my entire body buzzing, like I was sitting in an electric water bath. And I've been in Japan, for instance, where electric water baths are the kind of the thing. This was a very different experience. Everything from the tip of my fingers down to the tips of my toes, ears, I could feel this buzzing. I could hear it. But at the moment of waking up, there were, and I can't even call them words, there was words in my head that said, "This is how you connect."
Whoa.
And that wasn't the word, but that's the best translation of the moment. And after about 10 to 15 seconds of this, I just, and this is why I don't think it was physiologic necessarily, or some sort of odd physiologic effect. I just said, this has to stop. Make it stop. And it did.